series today, sort of what are the things that I'm afraid of, and I came up with this one of the top of my list. The top of my list is I'm afraid of being a burn victim. So I would rather fall off a cliff than survive being burned my whole body. I'd rather be paralyzed head to toe or neck to toe than go through the agony of trying to recover from being burned. The agony of, I mean, there's a girl actually who's singing on America's Got Talent. You guys seen this girl at all? You guys watched that show? Her name is Ketchy. Here's a picture of her. She's made it to the finals. Back in 2005, she was in a plane accident, one of 2 survivors of that plane accident, burned almost head to toe. No chance of survival. I mean, barely hanging on. They resuscitated her, got her back, got her flowing. But man, the recovery process is long. I was trying to figure out what goes into burn recovery, and man, I just started, my fear of it elevated because it's a long process. It's a painful process. And it's not done when you're, like, she's not done recovering. She, if she wants to have kids, will have probably skin grafting because the skin that is grafted on is not elastic enough to kind of maintain that. So there's still procedures that she'll have to have, and you don't ever get over it. That's scary. I think that's why a lot of people, when they think about getting involved in community or people, burned once, shame on you, burned twice, shame on me. I don't want to be burned again. I think a lot of us, we could open up our chests and see our hearts, and at least the spiritual, the non-physical dynamic, we'd see a lot of burn victims in here. From relationships, maybe it's parents, grew up in a home where parents abandoned or abused, and you're a burn victim. Or maybe it's from just a community of peers that were supposed to be there, or a spouse that was supposed to be there, and they left in the worst possible way. You're a burn victim, and you can say, hey, I've gone past that, but we all know we still sit with some of the pain. There's still a process in all of these. It doesn't ever just go away. Like you saw in Ketchy, sometimes the scars are always evident and always there, and you see them translate into your life. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios, and perhaps what we're talking about this morning, it's your burn and your heart has come through the church, an environment like this somewhere. I mean, the church has not been absent of wrong. In fact, throughout the entire history, we have evidence that the church has burned people. In fact, literally, this is not sorry for my laughing there, but literally, the church has burned people, put them on the stake. Just sad, and figuratively throughout. And so we want to speak into that in this series. We want to speak into those relationships, those dynamics, those areas, because a lot of times those scars, those wounds, that burn victim on the heart, it affects us. And if we're not aware and allow ourselves to speak into that, and allow ourselves to feel it, and allow ourselves to know what God wants to say to us in that, it'll impact us in ways that we're not aware, and it'll hurt other people, because hurt people hurt people. At least unaware hurt people hurt people. When you start taking stock in what the hurt is, you can let God's love kind of immerse in that, and we want to do that in this. So this morning we're starting with a topic that I think is the most important, because it's the one in which we oftentimes translate, hey, the church and God are kind of synonymous in our experiences, and so it's important to speak into that one. So what we're going to be doing at these is each week we're going to be telling a story of somebody who's kind of been burned in that way. Gives you a chance, especially from our leadership, a chance to get to know our leadership even more. And so we want to be very real and raw in this whole thing. And the problem with that is that there's always other people involved. And usually we videotape these mornings so you can watch them online. But because of the fact that there's other people involved who aren't necessarily here, we're going to be stopping the video for these stories, and oftentimes as we go along, including this morning. So I want to ask that the video in the back gets stopped. And I want to introduce you. We're all good? I'm just going to assume that some of you can relate on various levels to what he shared there this morning. Again, like I said earlier, if we were to kind of be able to open up all the chests in here and see kind of what's on the heart, we would probably have a room of burn victims. Some of you by the church, some of you by this church, feeling like this church has burned me. It's the Bridge Church that has been hard for me to deal with because of the hurt. And no doubt, I'm just going to say this, I know that there's people who have perhaps left the church at times here who have felt that way, and it hurts me that that's been the case. And if you're feeling that way in some ways, I want to say I'm sorry that's been the experience, and my prayer is always the Lord would become our healer, because there really is no one else we can look to for healing. If we look to someone else to heal us, then we are looking to the wrong spots, fabricated spots. And so that's where I pray. And I felt the same, burned as well over times. And I just asked the Lord to, Lord, heal my heart on these things. What's interesting about, Bill kind of hit on this, because we asked the question of how does this impact your emotions toward God, or what were you feeling toward God, because you have your experience with the church, and the church is supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus, supposed to be God's people on earth, but oftentimes it's just not, right? We act very, there's egos involved, there's agendas involved, there's whatever it may be, and it's harder to parse out perhaps the heart of God and the heart of man in different situations and so forth. And these hurts that are done against us can last for years and years and years and years, and sometimes you never get over them. I remember talking to someone in this church this last week, and he was sharing about his parents. They were Holocaust survivors, and so it means they're Jewish, and they actually literally hate God. Now they're passed away now, but through his life and his adult life, hate God. When they were in the camps, right, that the church was largely enabling Nazi. In fact, when Hitler died, he died in good standing with the Catholic Church at the time. I heard another pastor share that there is, from other Holocaust survivors, or actually from other Christians in Germany, that's the feeling that when the trains would go by on the rails, and there's a church nearby hearing this, every time I went by on a Sunday morning, they would sing louder to drown out the cries of people who were just crying, knowing they're going to their death. They would sing louder the praise of God. I mean, what is going on here, right? If someone embarrasses you, and those people on the trains are going, these Christians don't care about us, and there's a lot of black marks, and it leaves resounding pain in your heart. And this individual who was a part of this church, his parents hated God, hated Christians. So when he became a Christian, they disowned him. In fact, they disowned him up to 4 times. I mean, it can last forever, last a long time, because what Christians, what the church, institutional individual does, people then, and it's rightly so, and even wrongly so, but attach to God. And this is why there's people who are burned, because they heard a televangelist on one morning or one evening saying, if you just sow a seed of faith, then you will have your credit card debt erased, and so give us a seed of $1,000 and you'll start seeing your credit cards, and going, wait, that didn't work. The man of the cloth said it would. What's going on? God, maybe, do you just not like me? You hate me, right? This is why that family has been struggling and struggled their entire lives with Jesus, because, and here's the problem, when people are hurt, they tend to hurt. This is why that family could not accept their son when they came to Jesus. They disowned him, cut him off. Hurt people hurt people. When you feel that way, unless you allow the Lord, unless you allow something in there to speak into that hurt, to soften it, unless you become aware that it really is there and put it in light of the gospel of Jesus, you will start to keep the residual effects of hurting people. And I'm going to speed up on my message because what Bill shared was awesome, but we have too much here to cover in our time. So let me just say this, kind of summarize some things here. I think it's beautiful that the scriptures show us that for someone like you or Bill or myself to be angry and wrestle with who God is by what his people have done, that's awesome that he gives us that permission, because the Psalms is a book that is littered with people who get angry at God because of what's happening through his people, and confused and bitter, and Lord, where are you, and why aren't you doing something? Why did you let this happen? And never at one point do you hear condemnation come down on them and saying, how dare you question me and my goodness for you? What God does is he engages that. He engages it, and he speaks words of healing and promise and care in the midst of that, and he challenges them to reflect upon his goodness, but never condemnation. In fact, Psalm chapter 34, verse 18, the Lord is close, he says, in the midst of this person's struggle. He remembers the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and when you're brokenhearted, you feel alone, you feel abandoned, you feel rejected. That's the brokenhearted person. The Lord is close to them. Jesus says that I will never leave you nor forsake you. There's nothing. In fact, here's a statement to lock into your minds. Jesus, God is happy that he made you, and he's happy to love you. Because sometimes we can question if he really does love us. Look at what I've done. Maybe God's walked away. Look at my part in that problem. Maybe he's abandoned me. No, God is happy to have made you, and he's happy to love you, warts, wrinkles, and all. No matter what your past may include, no matter what your present entails, no matter what your future is in terms of your walk, you're going to be imperfect. God is happy to make you, and he is happy to love you right now. He is close to the brokenhearted. And then it goes on and it says, and he saves or brings victory to those who are crushed in spirit. Again, Psalm 147:3, the Lord heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. We need comfort, his presence, but we also need healing. And this is the question, how do we get healed? Because when I look at the cross of Jesus Christ, when he died on that cross, it was not just to forgive sins, it was to reconcile sinners to God, but also to each other. It was to bring reconciliation. This is why there's hope in the midst of all the chaos of the world. People hold out hope. When you see Charlottesville, there's some kind of hope. Maybe we can bring reconciliation even there. And this is why there's hope in God's heart as he instills forgiveness upon you, that he is calling you not just to receive his forgiveness, but to work out forgiveness in your relationships with each other. And he wants to bring that healing. He wants to help quell the bitterness. Now, sometimes full reconciliation is not all in your control, and it's not going to happen because you can't control it all. But he wants to help heal the bitterness. He wants to help heal the anger. Because we don't want to live like that, and he doesn't want you to live like that either. He wants you to be filled with hope and filled with joy, and sometimes that's been ripped away, you feel, by that circumstance. So how do we start walking and experiencing that? I want to touch on just that this morning. I want you to know that you are deeply loved, but I want you also to be able to walk in that love, walk and experience in that. And this is something you have to cooperate with God on. You have to cooperate. And Jesus, one thing I see about him is he was deeply wounded by the community that he spent 3 years with, he ministered with, he did miracles with, he empowered. I mean, these guys saw everything. They were the posse together, doing life together. Jesus was committed to them. And then the worst possible night of anybody's life, these men, one betrays and 11 abandon. One of those denies him, that even knows him. In the midst of that, none show up for his trial, none as a character witness, all run away. And yet after the cross, after the resurrection, Jesus goes after them, showing that he wasn't just in this for how they made him feel. He was in it because the cross, because God is about restoring people into relationship, not just vertically, but also horizontally. And so he wants to, again, move us in that direction. And like I said before also, this could take years, or even it may never happen because it takes two to tango. But he wants to work on our hearts and our postures and our care. So how do we start moving that? How do we cooperate with him? Here's just two points that I see in Jesus' life that I would say enabled him, that empowered him. Yeah, he's God, but these are the things that God has in mind as he moves to a relationship with us. The first thing I would encourage you to write down one night is you got to remember that people disappoint. People do disappoint. And I know that that's, okay, I get that, whatever it may be, people disappoint, but we have to just, okay, people do disappoint. They'll disappoint me. That's the first rule of marriage, right? Just know your spouse will disappoint you. Because if you think that they won't, then you're going to be hightailing out of there right away. It's just who we are. Even people with the best intentions will disappoint. As I've been a part of this church now for 3 years, and I've seen people leave this church because they were hurt by me. And I look back on scenarios, and I wrestle with what took place, and I think, man, I had nothing but good intentions in that relationship with that person and the scenarios. You can have two people seeking the Lord and still get hurt by their interactions. Two people who are seeking the face of God and his desire with intentions and still get hurt, which is crazy to think about, but it can still happen. And people are just naturally, we're going to experience disappointment through our lives. Here's what happened with Jesus in Matthew 26. Now, this is the last night of his life. He has just had this big supper with the disciples. Judas has left to betray him. He is in the garden. And then Jesus says, then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep and the flock will scatter. But after I will raise up, I will go before you to Galilee. Now Peter answered him, God, this is not me. It's all of them, but not me. Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. I will stay true to you. I will hold tight And Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you, this very night, Peter, hours from now, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him emphatically, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. And if you've read the Gospels, then you know that he didn't. And they didn't. Now, Jesus, I was thinking of this, like, at that point, I would have been like, oh, thanks for the sentiment. I mean, I'm so glad that you're reinforcing your love for me. But he never goes there. Why? Because he knew better. And he knew better because he spent time even looking at what God says about people. The Bible says that we're all faithless. We are. Even with good intentions, you can be faithless. Do you know that? With your kids, you will promise them something tomorrow, and then circumstances come in, and you say, well, we can't do that anymore. And they're going, well, you promised. Well, yeah, but I couldn't see the future, so I had to change the plans. Even with your good intentions, you could be faithless with your words, right? Jesus knew. He knew these men. He knows our hearts, and he knew that they were going to disappoint him. And men and women, let's say this, they should have stood by him. People should stand by you. People should be gentle. People should be impartial and generous and kind and peace-loving and forgiving. Yes, it should be all of those things, but that's not always the case. Now, if you come around here any length of time for the past several months, you've heard me say this phrase, that we want to be a church of lost and broken people finding hope in Jesus. You know why? Because 2 things. We're all objects of mercy. And that's awesome to think before the Lord. I'm an object of mercy before you. Okay, but that's also dangerous out here. I'm in a room of people who have been shown mercy, which means they're not perfect. It means they need mercy. If they need it from God, they probably need it from me too. But here's the deal with this, is that the place you're finding hope. We're not a church of lost and broken people finding our hope in this room. We're a church of lost and broken people finding hope in Jesus. That's where it goes. People will disappoint. God will not disappoint. People will hurt. Even with the best intentions, God always knows what's best. And so this is part of this. Even, Lord, this is every week, every day, you have this, Lord, I need to put my hope back on you. I'm putting it in this person over here, and that keeps hurting me. Let me put it over to you. You don't disappoint. You are good. And let me tell you what this part means. As you put it on him, here is why and what you need to do. It's number 2, sit with what God has done for you. As you put it on him, you got to sit there with what God has done for you. Sometimes the reason we can't experience the healing or take steps in that or start to feel the bitterness, the anger, start to move away at times is because we're spent all our time reading our Facebook messages and Facebook posts, but never reading what God is saying to us. We're caught up on the world's words, but not in God's word. We don't know how deep his love is. Oh, we hear a postcard and a Hallmark we get in the mail and go, oh, that's really nice and sweet. But the depth, the magnitude of that love for us, we're not sitting there going, Lord, let me experience this love. Let me understand what you're doing. And this is why we do that 2 years through the Bible, right? Every day reading 2 chapters, just getting something what God has spoken into you. This is why you should be in a presence like this every week, rhythmic. Build it in, because you've got to hear that God loves you, that he's glad he made you, and he's glad to love you. You got to hear that. You've got to know that. Jesus, prior to that garden scene where he told them and they all promised not to, that a few hours earlier he was having dinner with his disciples. And in that dinner, you have him about to wash their feet. But before he washed their feet, this is what the text says. During the Last Supper that night, when the devil had already put it into Judas' heart, but he had not left yet to betray him, Jesus, here he is, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, text keeps going, he got up and he washed everyone's feet. He washed Judas' feet, he washed Peter's feet, and the other 10. Knowing that they were not going to, his community would abandon him, deny him, betray him. Knowing that, because he knew something else. Here it is. He knew something else. Knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. And that he had come from God. There's his identity as going back to him. Here it is. He knew what God had done for him. He knew who the God he walked with. He knew his Father. I'd encourage you to write this down. Get a picture on the screen. This is a phrase that has accompanied me for my life. What God has planned for you, no one can take away. What God has planned for you, no one can take away. It feels like they can. Romans 8:31 and 32. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but he gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously and joyfully give us all things? Nothing that his disciples did that night took anything away from what God had planned to give him. It did nothing. What somebody has done to you in the past, the church has done to you, whatever it may be, I want you to hear me on this. They didn't destroy any of God's plans. They destroyed nothing of his kindness and goodness that he intends to show you. Nothing. We don't always believe this. We actually think that our lives would be better if they hadn't done that. My life would be better if only you hadn't done that. Right? If only you hadn't talked that way. If only they hadn't done this to me. My life would be way better. I mean, look at the consequences of that. And yes, you can see the resounding consequences of those things, but I want you to know that every good and perfect gift comes from above. They can't steal that. They didn't hijack that. They didn't. I'm not saying this is a quick Band-Aid and there you go. I'm just saying this is where Lord, okay, I'm really hurt right now. It's just good to know that you have not changed your plans for me. It's good to know that nothing's been destroyed in your agenda for my life. It hasn't. Nothing's been destroyed. It sounds simplistic. It sounds almost too good to be true, but this is the hope that the cross testifies over and over. I mean, the cross is that permanent statement in the sand of history that sits there and says that the worst intentions of humanity not only didn't destroy God's plan, but it actually brought about. So if that's the case, then Lord, then you are actually using this for something incredible for me. There's a rest that I can have even in the midst of that chaos. Jeremiah 29:11, we oftentimes, if you've been in the church, you probably have saying to yourself, yeah, but you can't use Jeremiah 29:11 to talk about us. It's talking about Israel. And it is. But guys, it's speaking into our experiences also. Because at the lowest point of this nation, when they're in captivity and beaten down by their sin, but also by the nations, and they're at the lowest point, God speaks to them, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you hope and a future. To give you hope and a future. And here's the deal, is God's not saying, I'm going to tell you my plans and how it works, but I have a plan, and this hasn't ruined it. In fact, I want you just to lean into me even more. And here's why God has plans for them, and I'm going to bring this to a close, because we have some fun things this morning. Here's why God has plans for them. It's not because they deserve it. In that text, Jeremiah 29, the indictment of Israel is before that, what they have done. Their indictment, right, against themselves, their leaders and so forth. And God says, it's not because you deserve it that I have plans, it's because I am a God who loves to show mercy. I love to show mercy. I love to show mercy. I love to show you mercy. That's something that we don't allow ourselves to hear. God shows his love for us in this, Romans 8:5-8. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Why is this important in this conversation? Because if we forget what God has done for us, if we forget the magnitude, let's say somebody gave you $1 billion in today's economy, $1 billion, and somebody stole from you $10 of that. How distraught would you be? This is not saying that things don't really hurt, but God wants us to come and just keep refreshed. How big is my security in you? How good is my gift? Nothing's been stolen. Again, I don't want to simplify or minimize the pain. What I'm trying to do is what Jesus is speak into that and say, let's elevate your thoughts of God's kindness to you, the mercy. While I was a sinner, Christ died for me. Lord, you revel in that. It starts to heal your heart. It starts to heal your heart. So when you look at somebody, you go, you know what? You didn't steal anything from me. You didn't steal anything from me. God's got my world. He's my protector. He's my healer. He's mine. He's my life. You didn't steal that from me. It's hard to feel that. And this is where it says, God says, meditate on what God has done and his works for you. Because not that it takes you from any kind of pain, but it allows you to start to find your sense of well-being in his good and all-powerful care for you even more. And every time that we feel hurt by somebody, here's the invitation by God. Okay, let's take our hope off of that person and let's put it back on me. Because I'm not going to let you down. Just take your hope off of that person. See, in this room here, we come together because Jesus, when you follow Jesus, he leads you into community, right? But never in the Bible are we called to put our hope in that community. Put our hope in that. And our hope and identity is in him. But he leads you into this because he wants us to do, as sinners who have been shown mercy, to experience and grow in the kind of love he shows to us. And sometimes we need hands and feet to really experience and be able to show that in front of us. So, I know that some of you are really struggling right now. You're struggling because you have been hurt, and you're struggling with me because maybe I don't fully understand, and you're going, but you just don't get it, Tim. And you're right, I just don't get it. I probably never will, but don't get stuck in the past with anger and bitterness. God wants to walk with you forward. Anger, bitterness, all those things hold you back captive. And some of you have been captive in it for a long time. And Jesus is saying, will you trust me? Will you listen to my voice? Will you take the next step with me? Will you trust me? Jesus, I thank you that we get a chance in here to really acknowledge we trust you. And I thank you for what this morning as people who are going to be baptized, acknowledging, yeah, I've got hurts and I've hurt people. I am an object of mercy, and I just celebrate you, and I take a step towards you in celebration of that. So, Jesus, we thank you so much for your kindness and mercy toward us. Amen.